Question.
Tad Hogue, IMM. So I'm wondering, as the FDA is looking at this nanotechnology regulation, does it influence or is it led by the similar discussions in other countries?
I think more and more there is an effort to try to harmonize whenever possible. One of the things that's been interesting is to see that divide in the biotechnology context. And that's, I think, where we first started hearing the term, the precautionary principle, coming up. So there's this sense that here we're really focused on the science, and there they're focused on the science, and I think everybody's trying to harmonize on the science. But then what gets difficult is for the questions that fall outside of the scientific realm. Okay, so we have this technology, it's safe, it's effective, do we really want to use it, or how are we going to make it available? How the U.S. and how the EU handled those questions, I think, is yet to be determined. We still see a lot of disparity in the biotech arena. I mentioned just the example of RBST approved in the U.S., not approved in Canada. I think it's also not approved in the EU. So there's a report that came out, a roadmap for nanomedicine that was put together by a consortium of, it was really led by private industry-led effort. But they teamed up with the European Commission to develop this roadmap for nanomedicine, and it's available online. I can send you the link for that if you want as well. But that's interesting because our approach here, NIH has its nanomedicine roadmap, and what they've chosen to do is to establish these 8 centers for to fund basic research on nanotechnology, and they've split out these different phases. But it looks like what's happening in the EU, and the latest document that comes out of this EU program is pretty frank. There's a quotation in there, I don't want to misquote it, but it's something along the lines of, it's clear that an academic or a laissez-faire approach to research in the nanomedicine area just it's not going to be effective. And so they've really tried to hone in on 3 topical areas to guide their research. Part of it, is in recognition of the fact that the economy gets tight. There's less money to go around, and so if you're going to draw investment, if you're going to put it on a lot of money, you really want it to yield results in the relatively near term in a category of products that is useful and beneficial. So there are a lot of factors at play that would seem to go beyond the science.
Kester, Penn State College of Medicine, and I'll put on my Keystone Nano hat here. Because surprisingly, the same technology we're using for cancer, the nano jackets, has an industrial use. And in fact, we have a contract with a major chemical manufacturer. And surprisingly, I've spent a lot of time in the last couple of months with the EPA and OSHA, et cetera. And just comparing the regulatory hurdles and procedures we have to go through between the two is mind-boggling, but there are a lot of animals right now who are getting calcium phosphate nanotechnology sprayed up their nose because you might have to make up tons of this stuff, and what does it mean when they have nano around the air?
Right.
So the question is, or the comment is, it seems like information is going to be coming through the EPA, OSHA, FDA around how we evaluate nanotechnology as more and more nano products come to the market. And it seems to me that EPA does not talk to the FDA, does not talk to OSHA, does not talk to... And it seems like information from each of those agencies should be passed along to each other, because what I'm concerned is that something in the industrial space may make a red flag and then stop development of FDA-backed products in the nano space, and or vice versa. And it seems like there's very little discussion between these organizations as they evaluate differently nano. So, comments?
Yeah, no, that's my perspective as well. Looking back on the history of the development of biotech, it seems to me that it was fairly gradual, where there was a lot of discussion early on about the risks, and there were a lot of very strong containment measures that were imposed on all the different labs that were engaging in the research. And then slowly, as people gained comfort, they started to liberalize those. And then on a federal government level, the Office of Science and Technology Policy in the White House really took on the role of pulling together all those different agencies and developing a comprehensive policy. And so you see those Federal Register notices, you go back into the 80s and the 90s, and you see those Federal Register notices where the first Federal Register notice is the Office of Science and Technology Policy. Here's our framework, you know, here's how we're going to make sure that there's coordination across all the agencies. And then you had each agency follow along with its own Federal Register notice, so you ended up with something that was about that thick. But at least you had the sense that there was an overarching comprehensive effort to coordinate at the federal level. And one of the criticisms being levied now, and I think fairly, is that we've yet to see that with nanotechnology. So I think it's bad enough, you know, that information doesn't get shared the way it should within FDA components. I mean, sometimes you have to make a really strong effort to make sure that CEDAR and CBER and, you know, whatever components you deal with are actually talking to one another. I can, you know, sympathize with the challenge that you face in trying to get some kind of exchange of information communication between agencies.
In fact, I just asked the director of the Office of Science and Technology basically the same question.
Yeah.
And they said that's a really good question.
Yeah. I mean, to an outside observer, it's kind of striking, you know.
This brings up a fact that's current, that it's very difficult to get people to talk to each other. And what are the mechanisms for doing that? And there are techniques for, you know, for encouraging people to, I mean, it's not restricted to the FDA, but the, you know, the nature of current discourse doesn't lend itself to these kinds of open discussions. People prefer debates, you know, to discussions with some kind of agreed upon outcome. Next question, please.
So Molly Strike at University of Toronto. I was wondering if you could comment on cosmeceuticals and maybe nutraceuticals, because if cosmetics aren't regulated, now cosmetics, you know, claim to have a pharmaceutical or a benefit that way. I was wondering if they would be regulated any differently.
Yeah, I mean, it's an area of concern for FDA. A cosmeceutical is sort of, it's a marketing term. It's not a regulatory term, but the idea, you know, industry loves the marketing potential, the cosmetic industry does, but at the same time they recognize that they have to maintain a very clear dividing line between you know, what they're marketing and how they market it. So there are certain substances, certain ingredients that if you stick them in a cosmetic, even if you don't say anything about what your intended use is, are going to make that cosmetic a drug, at least in FDA's eyes. When you have, you know, a substance that's approved for a drug, its only, you know, use, conceivable use, really is as a drug, and it has a clear drug-like effect. Even if you say nothing about it, FDA is probably going to come after it as an unapproved drug. But there are a lot of things that sort of fall into that gray area where you could have multiple uses and multiple applications. And so there is where it gets tricky and it gets challenging for FDA because you're adding in the ingredient and then you're not making the claim. You know, it's going to have the same effect whether you make the claim or not, whether it's a structure function effect or a disease prevention effect. It's going to have that effect even if you don't make the claim. And I think with some of these, you know, what happens as a practical matter is that a manufacturer can put the product out there, not make the claim, and then the rest is what's happening in the cultural background. So if the ingredient is being talked about, you know, and it's known, it's understood to have certain potential effects or certain potential benefits, then essentially the manufacturer benefits from that cultural noise, doesn't have to make the explicit claims in association with the product. So it's a difficult area, and it's one where FDA has acknowledged that you know, it faces some challenges. And with the nutraceuticals, it's the same idea, except then you're talking about a food and not a cosmetic.
Well, just one quick addition. We now talk about polymers, so materials that have therapeutic benefit. And what's interesting to me is knowing whether they would be regulated as a device or a drug, because it's a material. It's not a protein. It's not a drug. It's not a therapeutic. It's, you know, but it does have a therapeutic benefit. I guess it's one of these borderline cases.
But if you look at the Office of Combination Products website, they have a publicly available a whole set of what they call, you know, their request for determination response letters, and they're redacted of the confidential information, but you can see enough in there to know what kind of product they were looking at. And it's fairly useful. I mean, there are two ways to look at the data. They have what they call capsule descriptions. So if you look at products handled by the Office of Combination Products that were ended up assigning to CEDAR, you click on that, and then you'll see the categories, you know, the drug products, and then a little further down you'll see the combination products. And there's some really interesting, I mean, if you go through and you do that for products that were assigned to CBER, those that were assigned to CEDAR, those that were assigned to CDRH, there's some where, you know, it's really interesting because it looks like for some of these, you know, it might have gone either way. And in point of fact, based on their assignment algorithms, you know, it might have gone either way. But I think there, you know, if you just back up to the basic question, is the primary mode of action chemical or not?
That's right.
If it's chemical, then you're looking at a drug.
Only
And if
this.
it's not chemical, then you're looking at a device.
Actually, I have a good example for this. Recently, in Israel, they developed alginate as a kind of a support for for heart failure. You inject it. It's a very sophisticated formulation that take advantage of the high calcium in the heart during the effect, and it was licensed now to a big German company for a lot of money. It already did clinical trial, and it's defined by the FDA as a device because there is no chemical interaction. It just support. It just physical support. That's the definition. Very clear cut, as you said. And it was very smooth. There was no argument. FDA accepted it. Hyaluronic acid, I'll talk about it later. Again, the same story. So as long as it's only physical. But I have two comments. One, any one of you know what is the meaning of the word cosmetics?
It has and I'm sorry.
It's a Greek word.
Yeah, I should have touched on that before, but all of those product categories that were highlighted in that little graphic with the different ovals, they all have statutory definitions. They're sort of defined by law. And a cosmetic, to paraphrase, is something that's, you know, applied to the body to enhance appearance.
And doesn't do anything. You have to add. Doesn't do anything except it. That's what the Greek translation from the Greek. It's a facade. That's what they said. Something that to make you look nice.
Right. That's it.
But doesn't have any other value.
If
That's
it has even a structure
translation,
function effect, it is then by law not a cosmetic. Once a cosmetic crosses the line and is claimed to have a structure function effect, an effect on a structure or function of the body, or to have any effect on a disease state or to prevent disease, then it has become a drug by definition.
Yeah. But there is, you know, I'll get it. There is a nanotechnology has brought with him a new field which called nanotoxicology. Nanotoxicology is a very hot field today, especially in Europe. US is not that strong in it. And one of the things that is clear for the very quite few reviews, some of them are secret, are not allowed except if you sign some special things, that one of the bad things we are doing, we treat all the nanotechnology in one box. It's not. Very different. It's different according to the physics and according to the chemistry, and this difference make a huge, huge impact on the toxicology. I think if we close our eyes and do not see this problem now, actually about 2 months ago, the editorial of Scientific American was dealing with this issue, actually trying to force the FDA to apply the same rule as in Europe, try to test it before it's too late. And there was a story with Mitsubishi, the Japanese company car. They built a nanotechnology institute with a lot of workers, and they made many new nanoparticles, whatever. And one day, after 2 years, a Japanese scientist said, we never tested it, even not on cell, not on animal, nothing. They tested all their compounds, all the cell died, all the animal died. They closed up the center and fired all the people. So I think you don't want to be in this case. Right. You want to do it side by side with the nanotoxicology. I don't think we should really forget this. And you know, I was in contact with one of the leaders in nanotoxicology in Europe, a Dutch guy by the name of Paul Broom. He's almost the pop in this field. And I asked him, you know, some question. He said, you're dealing with liposome? That's not a nanoparticle. I said, why? He said, because they're not toxic. I said, can I get it in writing? He said, sure. So I have it on my email in writing, but meaningless. But I mean, in a way, most of these nanoparticles really have some toxicity. Carbon nanotube in Europe was really forbidden to use anymore. The EU stopped funding study with CNT because they are toxic. They don't kill the cell directly. They accumulate in the cell. Cell doesn't do what to do with them, and then the cell die, simply full of this CNT. So, you know, there are a lot of unknowns that we should study now, and don't wait till you have spent so much money. How many $billion in the world? $3-4 billion spent now on this? It's a huge sum of money. We can do a lot of good thing with it. I believe in nanotechnology. I'm one of the people that really push it, but I think we have to do the things right, and otherwise we kill the field.
Well, thank you. We now have our coffee break. Can we extend that to, let's see, it's 2:30 now.
You're the chairman.
Let's get back at 3 o'clock.
Thanks very
We
much.
learned a lot. You can see everybody loves to talk too. So thank you for coming.
It's a change of
You can all
pace.
return now.
Yeah, it's an eye opener. That's a real. Even the question, the good points brought up in the questions.
Thanks again.
Sure thing. Yeah, it was a needed